You're listening to the Adventuring Party for the second week of September 2024. This week, the party might appear to be having an in-depth analysis of RPG mechanics, but we're just kind of vibing. The Adventuring Party, discussing tabletop and radio gaming the Irish way. Please note that there will be no episode next week.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
And I'm Shane. You may also know me as Warlord Scar, Spreader of Skulls, Destroyer of Character Sheets, Spreader of Insanity. But you know, that a lot of that's marketing. You know, I'm a nice enough guy when you've paid me some money.
Quite a bit.
We're here to talk about RPGs that maybe are a little bit like that, where they certainly make a big show about being extremely grim, but maybe that's just part of the dressing.
Not even necessarily extremely grim, but as you say, like the dress, there could be a bit of dressing there for a few different moods and atmospheres.
Yes. The reason this topic comes to mind, I think, a big part of it is that we're both huge fans of the various Warhammer RPGs, the Dark Heresies and Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I mean, I even like the newer versions to an extent. But yeah, often when you talk about these in casual conversation, you'll hear an awful lot of people talking about, the super dangerous critical injury rules. And I mean, the ones in 40k took up an awful lot of 4 different damage types, each with 4 different critical hit charts. You had 8 solid pages of dedicated to just the horrible things that happens.
In quite a bit of detail.
Yes. The phenomenon of a Space Marine screaming as his arm explodes is one very documented example. Melting, setting on fire, exploding so hard that you hurt people around you. These were all very interesting elements of the game. And then you would hear about things like corruption points or insanity points, and all with the implicit promise that, your character will be destroyed. You will step foot outside and Goblin will knock your leg off and give you tetanus and mutate you into a Zinch demon or something.
That sounds about right. It's a grim, dark universe.
Yeah, but I think for the emphasis that these kinds of mechanics are given, I think in actual play, they come up a lot less than you might think for something that is such a big chunk of the rules or whatever. Like, there's something that I think are a little bit more niche than people might realize. Like, I mean, sure, there are some people who will, for every single mook that shows up, gleefully turn on the critical injury chart whenever they get hit by whatever weapons you have, and see just how does each of these unfortunate gangers of the rusty knife die when you shotgun them. But I feel like that's something that a lot of groups will fall out of favor with, as they realize they're basically doubling the length of time that a combat encounter goes on for, because of all their grim descriptions of the hyperviolence going on around them. Yeah, but like, I feel like in actual play, the fact that players are probably going to be avoiding a lot of combat means that the actual rules themselves don't get referenced as often. And because people know how bad mutation mechanics are going to be, corruption, they're going to be very careful about anything that might get them insanity points or corruption points or what have you. And so there's this interesting phenomenon, I think, where having the mechanic in the game, in the main rulebook, and talking about it ominously every time thing actually sort of prevents it from being used all that often.
Yeah, like it does shape the like how the game is played. But in a meta way, you could say that this also represents what the PCs are meant to be, like exceptional individuals, not necessarily the most powerful in the universe, but exceptional amongst humanity in general, because, well, they're not just turning into gibbering wrecks as soon as they see some weird sigils on a wall because they're being careful about things.
Essentially reflecting the sort of meta perspective through the mechanics, if you would, that explaining why the players are a bit more on the ball than the average, mud covered peasant in one of these games. I mean, that's certainly one way of looking at it. Notably, in the case of the 40k RPG, the idea, the vibe is that you have fate points, which show that even though at the start you were a sewer cleaner or a coachman or whatever, that you're going to go on to do big things, and you're probably not going to die that hard that quickly compared to the average person.
You have a shot. Also in the 40k RPGs are the, probably fairly infamous Psychic Phenomenon and Perils of the Warp tables. In Dark Heresy First Edition, there was almost no way of avoiding the possibility of Psychic Phenomenon. And if you're rolling the Psychic Phenomenon table, there's definitely a chance of Perils of the Warp cropping up. Like, you can mitigate these possibilities, but Psychic Phenomenon could be stuff like you start to feel something unfortunate has happened somewhere in the universe. Whereas the Perils of the Warp table goes all the way up to blood is raining from the sky and you've been possessed by demons.
Yeah.
I do find that a lot of these results do cause... A lot of them aren't as dangerous for the Psyker who kicks them off as for everyone around them.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are plenty that threaten the Psyker themselves. They are potentially devastating to things like if you're trying to be subtle. So even powerful Psykers have to decide how many dice they're rolling, because more dice, more power, but more dice, more chance of triggering Psychic Phenomenon rolls.
Yeah.
Which means that you need to be quite a powerful Psyker in Dark Heresy First Edition to subtly and anyway safely use your powers. Like if you're trying to be discreet. Now, from Rogue Trader onwards, they introduced the idea of fettering power, where you're rolling, you're using about half your psi rating, but you can't get a roll on the Psychic Phenomenon table, which does make things very safe. I would almost say too safe, but because the warp, but it does change the tone a little bit, and there is a marked difference there.
Yeah, I would say that was partly because they were showing a different side of things, of stuff like Space Marine librarians aren't supposed to get these like little petty psychic phenomenon things. They're supposed to be in command of their powers. But also, as I said, as the power level ramping up, I feel like they were going for a different vibe. The more higher powered things, they were meant to be more functional as opposed to the unpredictable phenomenon of being at the bottom of the Inquisition agent rung. The idea, I think, was that the vibe was different, and also you're always going to get those people who want to cast spells every turn and want to, like, okay, there's people who want to cause psychic phenomena every turn because they love chaos, regardless of the vibes of the game, but also the people who like feel mechanically useless, they can't use their powers safely. So they were always going to get pushback from that.
Like, well, some players are not going to be happy, unless they're able to use their abilities all the time, and other players aren't going to be happy unless their powers are being really effective all the time.
Yeah. That but those aren't. I feel like they were originally they were trying for their particular vibe of Psyker is going to have this really useful set of abilities, a whole bunch of like the minor psychic powers that you have in First Ed Dark Heresy, a whole bunch of really simpler things, like stuff like just having skill bonuses or unlocking a door, telekinesis, or stuff like that. Like not earth shattering, psychic lightning from space stuff that came later as you leveled up. By the late game, you could be absolutely ridiculous as a psyker in Dark Heresy. I think for the low levels, they got this really interesting vibe where most of the time you were doing relatively small but very useful things, but also you're doing these relatively small but very creepy and flavorful things. Like you're making everyone think that spiders were crawling up their legs, or making this weird smell of sulfur happen all over the place, or things like that. And then, of course, as you level up, you are doing bigger things, but also if you unleashed your full power, the chance of like really big perils of the warp got bigger and bigger, and this is when you get the blood from the sky and all that other stuff.
You can argue that the warp's unpredictable, so that even a minor use could plausibly cause something horrific or what have you. But even going back to a slightly older example, Call of Cthulhu has its insanity mechanic, which does color how investigators proceed.
Yeah, it was a big part of the thing. It was a unique selling point of the thing is that you had this, essentially this mental health system. And we can go on and on about, is it a good depiction of mental health? Its primary function was to be in genre because it was based on early Mythos stories, and an awful lot of those, the framing device was often, well, I'm in this padded cell and I've got this book, so let me just explain the crazy things I found before I start eating my own leg. Yeah, the idea was that just being exposed to these kinds of things would slowly erode your sanity. And if you had proper pacing stuff, most things wouldn't have that bad of an effect if you had a decent sanity to start with. Most of the time, you would say you say you had a 60 or 70 sanity to start. Most of the time, you succeed and take no damage, and you would lose one or two if you failed. But then, as the big stuff started coming out, you would lose sanity regardless. And it'd be like D6 sanity if you succeed, or D10 if you fail.
Mm.
And the natural effect of as your sanity starts to slip, it becomes easier and easier to slip harder. But one of the other things about Call of Cthulhu is a lot of the game is just mundane investigation, going around trying to figure out who's in a cult, who's connected to who, where are they getting the mysterious artifacts from. The actual day-to-day gameplay isn't about, losing 20 points of sanity and going mad in the street. That's meant to be end of arc kind of stuff, where you have your big fight in the cultist thing, and some horrible gribbly thing comes through, fails reality, and everyone starts losing sanity. That's meant to be a very occasional part of the game. It's not meant to be something that happens all the time. And an awful lot of sessions, you probably won't interact with sanity mechanics at all.
Yeah, I remember from some deep dark era, possibly Arcane magazine, of a recommendation of maybe one in every third session of something supernatural, which I think makes sense.
Yeah. The mechanic of having your insanity meter hangs massively over any discussions of Call of Cthulhu. But as that actual mechanic in play, its effect is far more what makes the players act as opposed to how it affects their dice rolls. It puts the players in the mindset of, oh, this is a game where digging too deep will eventually drive my character mad and give me all kinds of problems to work with. And, as you get further and further, things will get creepier and it'll be harder and harder to tell what's real and what's not. I think an awful lot of the effect of the mechanic is just in how it makes people think about the game as opposed to what it actually does in the game. I think it's similar with, as I said, things like the 40k things, where the simple fact that you have these rules for how horrible injuries are, I think the main effect is to make people try their best to mitigate against injury, which is a smart thing that helps get the players in the right mindset, because these games are aiming for a world where violence is brutal and therefore should be rare or done judiciously. And it gets them into the underdog mentality that they're hoping for Wolfrup or Darkhersey. And absolutely, as you level up, you really get the sense of, oh, I have gone from being afraid of stubbing my toe to I am fighting a dozen orcs at once.
You're more able to survive things going awry.
Yeah, and that is, I think, a testament to those systems, which often get accused of being very weak mechanically. But in terms of bringing across their vibe and really making you feel, like you've progressed as a character over the course of your career, I think Wolfrup and Dark Heresy were masters of that.
Yeah. I mean, you could start as a literal rat catcher in Wolfrup and make good. But yeah, just think of more examples of mechanics and tone. There's an OSR game that draws 5e inspiration called Low Fantasy Gaming. It's getting a new edition soon called Tales of Argosa, which currently has a free playtest document up.
Oh.
And what Tales of Argosa has is the Dark and Dangerous Magic table.
Ah.
There are magic classes. There are classes which are meant to use magic. And magic, it'll do these great effects, which are really handy. But there's always a chance something's going to go awry. And it could be something minor, or like it could be fairly hazardous for your character's health. I mean, you could argue it's a balancing thing, but considering Tales of Argosa draws a lot on sword and sorcery fiction for inspiration, it also does very much help to set the tone of magic isn't really something you can ever fully control or trust. And even when it's on your side, you can't trust or control it necessarily.
Yeah, no, this is kind of thing we're talking about is like one of the big criticisms of something like D&D is that magic is very well known. You read the description of your spell properly, then you'll find that you know basically everything about that spell, and it's rare to have this weird any specifically weird interactions unless your DM is homebrewed some monster that's just like, oh, every time you cast a spell, it causes rainbow magic to happen, or while holding this sword, all fire magic is retargeted randomly, or something like that. Which some people would say are perfectly valid magic items, but compared to how predictable a D&D spell is, not naturally, it would often feel like an intrusion to be making something so random and unpredictable in a game. And not to say that the original designers should do that occasionally. See the spell turning tables or the teleport off target tables to see various effects of that. But overall, I think even in the earlier editions, Magic in D&D was extremely predictable, and the randomness just came from the dice rolls, and whoever saved and whoever didn't. So you could make plans based on your spells, whereas that's not a that vibe is meant for, as I said, the resource management dungeon crawly game, where you want to make sure you know everything that's happening when you use one of your limited abilities. Whereas a sword and sorcery game is very much meant to be an in the moment situation, and therefore they can afford to say, well, every time you cast a spell, the chance of something very unique but unpredictable happening, that seems like inappropriate for our genre.
Sword and sorcery tends to be smaller scope in time and space as well. As in it, like the classic sword and sorcery story is vignettes where like the heroes have find themselves in some city or sailing up a river to some temple and the action's happening.
Yeah, you're not expecting to be micromanaging seconds or things. It's like you might be jumping between scenarios, either scenes or stories, or from one enemy to the other. You're going either out of the fire to the fire into the frying pan or whatever. And an awful lot of the danger that you're in is self-inflicted because you're a greedy so-and-so looking to steal some idols from some temples.
Again, life could be cheap and easily ended in such stories.
Yeah, and I assume the effect of having these unpredictable things is that people tend to save their spells for when things are a little bit more important, as opposed to just spamming them all the time. I feel like similar things we could maybe lay at the feet of the White Wolf games, particularly the earlier ones. They all tended to have similar phenomenon of what we might call tone setting the mechanics. I'm thinking of things like humanity in Vampire and paradox in Mage, for example, because these were big genre defining things. These are things that people that were important, even in universe. Like even in universe, like a vampire knew that if they did too many horrible things, they might end up just going feral. So they put a
Yeah.
big emphasis.
Their humanity gone, and they're just a wild beast.
Yeah, and this is the Sabat versus Camarilla thing, where the Camarilla put this huge emphasis on controlling themselves and having order, and instead of just hunting people randomly in the streets, you were supposed to get a, what was it? Not a blood larder, but like you meant to get a bunch of victims to drink from, etc. Oh, and then there was the Sabat was saying, no, we're beasts. We should probably just act according to our natures. And they would go around breaking the masquerade, drinking from whoever they want to drink from. And this was the big in-universe thing. But I'm not sure that necessarily translates to people going up and down humanity like every session of every game. I feel like a lot of vampire groups would just sort of set their expected humanity levels in the first couple of sessions as they figure out, like, well, this is the kind of stuff we want to do. And then I don't know, did you find that people were doing a lot of humanity changes or indulging too much or too little in Werewolf Rage? Or
I found that there was a stark divide in games where people tried to keep their humanity relatively stable, or humanity was was replaced with paths of enlightenment very rapidly. With paths of enlightenment are a generally Sabbat orient linked replacement for humanity, which certainly gives a certain different tone to things, as in showcasing the very alien nature in some ways of Sabbat thinking, because some of them really have drifted away from anything resembling humanity, especially if you're talking about things like the Tzimisces. I want to say Path of Transformation, but that may not be the name of it.
so in the sense that they would sort of come up with alternative ways to set the tone they wanted for their games, and White Wolf were happy to oblige with all these alternative moralities for different groups. And that sort of, I guess, comes back to World of Darkness's claim to being like the game of personal horror, where you are turning into a particular kind of monster. And it's about saying what kind of monster do you turn into. Actually, that's a good question. Like, would you find that when someone was using a path, that it was more likely for them to be pushing to try to change their path or level up their path to the particular level that they wanted, as opposed to people who stuck with humanity who would just sort of get to the level of humanity that the game expected and then just sort of hover there? Like, how often did the actual mechanics of humanity or paradox of that come up versus whatever path or other thing that they had? Are people choosing their own level of engagement with the mechanic, essentially? Are some people just sort of saying, all right, we're all Humanity 4, we'll just stay Humanity 4 for the entire campaign, let's not worry about it? Whereas other people are like, oh, I must claw back my humanity from the horrible low point of 7 that I've dropped to in session 3, versus the next person just going, I'm going to go path of baby eating, and I'm going to get all my nourishment from eating babies and never do anything else evil.
I suspect that the designers intend the I must claw my humanity back type of story, rather than the supervillains with fangs takes.
Yeah, I guess that sort of puts me in the mindset of, did the humanity system succeed in what I was trying to do? Did having humanity in the game cause the kind of effect they wanted? Or it's one of those things where you come back when you're discussing World of Darkness, is like, did it actually do what its designers intended, or did it turn into katanas and trench coats too early and then they felt they had to lead into that instead? I don't think it's a question with a solid answer, because, it's been 30 years and they're still coming out with 2 different lines of World of Darkness products with different answers in almost every book.
I mean, yeah, like any project which has that many designers over that long is going to have some. There's going to be some shifts in intention and execution, like inevitably.
Yeah, absolutely. I am wondering, were they expecting for people to be moving up and down humanity or paradox tracks every game? Was the werewolf going to be fighting against, losing and gaining 2 or 3 points of rage every session? Well, actually, for werewolves, rage is a bit more of a mechanic for them. But as they were like, was the intent for it to be a mechanic that people interacted with constantly, or was it meant to be a vibe setting? It was just like saying, like, having this in the game showed that being a monster was a huge part of the game, and it was going to take up real estate in your character sheet. It was going to take up several pages of rules, but it wasn't actually going to come up that often. We could say that's the design difference between White Wolf and 40k games, where they put an awful lot of work mechanically into their wound system, their corruption system, but the effect was to set the tone of the game rather than set the mechanics of the game necessarily. That might be just asking a design team of dozens or hundreds what they were intending to happen over the last 30 years. So maybe we're not going to get so cohesive an answer for that one.
Probably not.
Any other examples of interesting bad stuff in a game which may or may not actually come up in a game?
There are a variety of town events and carousing tables in different games, which tend to be more benefit than not, or at least more interesting than dangerous, just as a very general gut impression. I do find tables like that are wonderful for setting tone. Like an event table where you can run into colorful characters, can really set the scene for a city, or an event table where there's a good chance you're going to be knifed to the kidneys, if you drink one too many. Like it certainly gives an impression of that bar.
Yeah, again, very much world-setting material, and something that comes up, when it comes up and has impact when it does, but not necessarily a core mechanic that you're going to see every session, because most sessions are going down in a dungeon or exploring the wilderness or what have you. But yeah, like a well constructed random table, I think, can really, because again, we're sort of imagining the situation where the players and as well as the GM are looking at these mechanics. These are mechanics that are facing the entire table, and they're meant to have an effect upon the entire table and give them an idea of what they can expect. So if you put the right stuff in a random event table or some other chart that you're going to have, even if the individual things are never likely to come up, it is going to communicate a lot about the kind of stuff that you expect to come up in your game. And that helps solidify the image of people in your mind. And if you have an event with some really weird stuff showing up, Zach communicates, this is a really weird world. Don't expect to just be a bunch of humans complaining about cows or whatever. There's going to be goblins coming into the bar. There's going to be wizards accidentally falling out of the sky every so often. Putting the weird, the wonderful on this random event table tells you that random events are a big part of life for such an adventuring party. And even if you never actually end up rolling on that table, that has an impact on how people treat the world. It tells the GM, you don't need to be thinking this in terms of, mud covered peasants and angry knights. You can also think about it in terms of visiting merchants with wings, or a flying castle floating by. It tells you to make the world weird, as opposed to medieval life simulator number 37. And it tells the players to not expect that they're going to have a wonderful grasp on the world, that they can expect to have things come out of left field and disrupt all of their ideas of how they're setting things up, and that they're just going to have to roll with it every so often.
Even the tables that aren't facing players, like random tables for generating dungeons or settlements, can convey a lot of world building stuff, as in references to a particular empire.
Mm-hmm.
Like representatives from such and such an empire show up. That implies there's an empire. They behave in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
More tone building.
Yeah, there is a 1 in 3 chance of every town having a butcher's or a graveyard or such and such tells you an awful lot about what's going on in this world. If 1 out of every 10 towns has a drug den in it, that's communicating information.
Yeah, that like you could build a whole campaign around that implication easily. Like.
Yeah, and even if you don't roll on these tables that often, they're still inspiring, even if you never pick up a dice for them. So yeah, I think there's something to be said for having some space in your rule book for something that maybe doesn't actually come up as often as it implies it does. And then maybe you never roll dice except once every 3 sessions for this one thing. But it tells a story about the game you're playing. It tells you, should you rush the guys with shotguns in hopes of winning initiative and getting a crit, or should you maybe not do that, you silly fool? Tells you maybe you are going to turn into a bloodthirsty beast starved of blood and cracking people's bones to the marrow. Or maybe it tells you that really your investigator should probably just retire and forget all about those stolen artifacts and that weird book. Maybe just retire, stop playing the game. But all you gotta know. You can't, you're not, you have to know, don't you? You have to go a little bit mad to really figure out what's going on in the world. I think those kinds of mechanics are very interesting and don't necessarily say that, oh, this is wasted role space, this is 20 pages on charts, why are they doing this? It's just having them there, I think. They might have an effect on your game. And it might be just the effect you need.
Well, on that note, considering all these parties with tables affecting their destinies, this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventuringPTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike from version 3 license.